Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Suzuki in Action, Music, Mayhem, and Memories. My name is Heather Meyer, and I will be running everything in the background for our session today. We are thrilled to host today's webinar with Suzuki Association of the Americas. This is our third webinar in our Suzuki in Action series. If you haven't already viewed our previous webinars, I will be providing links at the end of today's session. All right, let's get things started. I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter, Barbie Wong. Barbie Wong is a music educator and speaker who teaches parents and teachers how to inspire kids to make music. With degrees from Stanford University and Smith College, Barbie has worked with hundreds of parents and music teachers throughout the world to help them understand motivation, effective practice, and joyful music making. Through her extensive research into the lives of musicians, Barbie has discovered simple, practical ways for parents to raise kids who love music. She loves to share her expertise through her online classes, in-person workshops, keynote speeches, and YouTube channel through her online classes. She loves to share her expertise through her online classes, in-person workshops, keynote speeches, and YouTube channel. Barbie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for that warm welcome. I am so excited to be here. And I would love for all of you to imagine two scenes. And feel free to, I invite you to put in the chat if you have things that you resonate with as I'm describing these two scenes, or if you have other thoughts that come up. Because, we're a nice community here. And in some ways, it's nice to have the chat. We do have Q&A for questions you have. All right, scene one. It's the first moment when you meet your child. What did you feel? What were your thoughts? How did you feel holding your child? And what kind of dreams or wishes did you have for your child? The first time I met my daughter, Tenzin, I remember holding her in my arms and just feeling so overwhelmed with joy and with love. And I had so many hopes for her. I wanted her to thrive. I wanted her to enjoy all the things that life has to offer. I wanted to share with her things that I enjoyed, like music. And I wanted to stay connected with her for as long as possible. Let's fast forward a few years, and it's scene two. In this scene, you're practicing with your child. You are with your child and either helping them or reminding them to practice. And for me, that scene has me sitting with Tenzin. She's now 4 years old. She's begun music lessons. And in this scene, I am frustrated. I don't know what to do because she's resisting all efforts that from me to help her learn a song. And at some point she looks at me. She says, "How do you know how to do that?" I felt so disheartened because I thought, oh my goodness, all I wanted was essentially that first scene. I wanted connection, I wanted joy, and it seemed like all was lost. When I look back on the two scenes, I'm so grateful for the first one. And I still go back and I enjoy those moments in my mind, in my memory. When I go back to the second scene, well, back then, obviously, it was very hard. However, I have come to really appreciate what happened in that scene because that point of pain began what is now a lifelong pursuit to help parents really get past a lot of these difficulties with music practice. And as I've done a lot of research into this, I realized that, first of all, it's common to have that second scene happen. Perhaps that's happened to you. And that it's something where it will, it will begin a lot of questions, I think, for a lot of us. How can we make practice easier? How can we instill a lifelong love of music for our children? And how can we stay connected with them through all of this? I have been very fortunate because Since that second scene, Tenzin actually found that cello was a better fit for her. And now today, she's 17 years old. And this is a picture taken from my birthday. And what happened was my family surprised me. The three of them, this is Tenzin on the left, and then Eris, my 15-year-old in the middle, and my husband on the right, who is not a musician at all. The three of them had gotten together and they performed Love Me Tender by Elvis. And it was one of the most heart-wrenching and heartfelt and just so touching moments of my life. And I will always remember that. So today's talk is in 3 parts. First, we're going to talk about the big picture with regard to helping our children attain a lifelong love of music. Then we will go into the 4 keys to musical longevity. So these are practical things that you can do right away that will make a difference in your child's desire to make music for life. And at the end, I will invite you to consider something that we've talked about today. And if anything resonates with you, to then consider doing something after you leave, because it's great that you're here. You know, everybody's time is so valuable. And I'm really hoping that in this time that we have together, that you will find something that resonates and that you will commit to trying something out. What will you do after we leave is just as important, probably even more important than what happens in this hour that we have together. We all know the Suzuki triangle is a wonderful paradigm for showcasing the importance of the parent's role in helping a child attain musical mastery. Previously, it was really thought of as, oh, it's this relationship between teacher and child, and the teacher will teach the child, and that's how a child attains, their musical expertise. But the parent's role is, I would say, equally, possibly even more important. And that's because Dr. Suzuki said, musical ability is not an inborn talent, but an ability which can be developed. And who best to help develop that talent? Well, the person who's actually with the child many more hours than the teacher. The teacher spends maybe 30 to 60 minutes a week. Well, the parent is there many, many more hours, even before the child meets the teacher. What I'm really more interested in are not the corners of the triangle, but the sides of the triangle, the relationship between teacher and child, between child and parent, and between teacher and parent. And I have to say, I'm really grateful as a Suzuki teacher myself. I have gotten such incredible training, and now I know I can really help a child on their way to musical mastery. And not only that, but to help them also keep in mind this idea of helping them, with character development and staying connected to this child. And so this side of the triangle is very strong. When it comes to what a parent is given to help a child, there are so many wonderful resources. The SAA journals have fantastic articles, and there have been numerous books written that really guide parents to help their child. But what is lacking, I would say, is that there isn't a course for parents. There isn't the same amount of training that parents can receive when compared to a teacher. And so that's the part where I think is really what I'm trying to do, is to help parents get these kind of skills. So I've created my own parent course. It's something where I'm helping them, basically take steps one by one so that they can help their child attain musical mastery. Now, Dr. Suzuki also talks about the importance of the teacher helping the parent guide the child. And so this part, I feel like, is someplace where it would be great to put a bit more attention into as well. It'd be great to have the pedagogy training include ideas on how to work with parents. And this is my second project after I've worked on the project of helping parents. And in all of this research I've done, I realized that parents, we're so busy, and sometimes it's easier to just come up with something that can really help them understand the gist of what we're trying to do here when we're trying to get our kids to learn music and to do it in a way where we stay connected to them. So I created the musical child pyramid. So this is my paradigm that looks at what parents can focus on. And if you look at this, you will notice that the biggest part to this pyramid is the environment. That's the most important part of raising a musical child. If the environment is not filled with music, the child will not be as excited to make music because music is a language. And if we can help our children learn music the same way they're learning their mother tongue, this is definitely what Suzuki was talking about, then it's so much easier than when lessons begin and then when practice then is on top of that. So let me give you an example of the musical child pyramid. A parent came to me and she was really upset because her daughter just would not practice, just did not want to practice, resisting it all the time. And she said, "What can I do?" And I said, "Well, let's take a look at what's going on in your house. What kind of music are you listening to?" I thought perhaps they're playing classical music and they're only listening to rock, and maybe it's a different genre that her daughter wants to get into. And she said, "Music? We don't listen to music." And so I said, "Well, in that case, you really need to start listening to music." And then I was thinking about lessons, and I thought, hey, wonder what's going on. So I asked her, what's happening with the music lessons? How is your daughter connecting with the teacher? And she said, "Oh, she doesn't like the teacher." I said, "Well, you can't have someone who enjoys practice when the lessons aren't going well and it's a musical desert, essentially." And so keeping this in mind, we will go into the 4 parts to musical longevity. And one of the things I thought about in terms of how do I help parents understand how to help, get their kids to be excited about music, I thought, you know what? Success leaves clues. Who is successful with music, or who are we looking at that's successful with music? And it's really the adults who are making music, adults who continue to make music, adults who are both professional and amateur musicians, because I think I can speak for all of us when I say, when we think about longevity, we're not really always thinking we need our children to become a rock star or play at Carnegie Hall. We want them to enjoy music for life. So I've actually interviewed a number of musicians who are both amateur and professional, and I've collected their stories, and I started to see that in their stories, they had a lot of similarities. And then I started looking into the lives of musicians that are more established, and I realized, they also have these similarities. And what's really neat about this is I know today's talk is very Suzuki oriented. And of all of these people, there's only one that I know actually did the Suzuki method, and that's Joshua Bell. These concepts are actually universal. It's not just we're doing Suzuki lessons and this is going to apply. If for whatever reason you somehow depart from Suzuki lessons, these 4 ideas will still be applicable and useful, and it's something that I hope will stick with you. And so today we're going to talk about 4 musicians. Long is an internationally acclaimed pianist, originally from China. He began playing piano when he was 3 and won a scholarship to study at the Beijing Conservatory when he was 9. And then at age 13, he won first prize at the International Tchaikovsky Competition for Young Musicians. The New York Times calls him the hottest artist on the classical music scene. And Long performs around the world to sold-out crowds. Yo-Yo Ma grew up in Paris to Chinese parents and began playing cello when he was 4. His family eventually moved to the United States, and he studied at Juilliard and at Harvard. He has recorded over 120 albums in a variety of genres, mostly classical, and he's received 19 Grammys. Yo-Yo believes that music has the power to bring people together and to foster greater connections. Mariah Carey is a singer, producer, and songwriter. She has a 5-octave range and is one of the best-selling music artists of all time. She holds the record for the most Billboard Hot 100 #1 singles by a solo artist, a female songwriter, and a female producer. Mariah has been inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame and continues to perform around the world. Lin-Manuel Miranda is a songwriter, actor, director, and producer. He has won numerous awards for his many creations. Lin-Manuel created and starred in Broadway's Tony-winning musicals Hamilton and In the Heights. He has also written the music to Encanto and Moana and starred in Mary Poppins 2. And in 2015, he won the MacArthur Foundation Award. The first person I'm going to talk about is Mariah Carey. Did you know that Mariah Carey wrote 18 of her 19 #1 hits? I was astounded to learn of her ability to write music as well as perform it. Now, she had a very difficult childhood. Her mom is white and her dad is black, and when they lived in a white neighborhood, the kids would tell her, "You are not white enough." And when they lived in a black neighborhood, they told her, "You're not black enough." And so she felt really lonely growing up and felt a lot of emotional pain. She also didn't get very much support from her parents emotionally, and they divorced when she was 3. So she actually ended up growing up by living with her mom. But she did, however, find one way to relate to her mom. And I'm going to read you an excerpt from her book, The Meaning of Mariah Carey. And I'd like you to answer these questions. How did Mariah connect with her mother? How did she learn to sing so beautifully? Like, where did she develop such an incredible vocal range? But in singing, I also found a connection to my mother, a Juilliard-trained opera singer. As I listened to her doing vocal exercises at home, the repetition of the scales felt like a mantra, soothing my frightened little mind. One day, while practicing an aria from the opera Rigoletto, she kept stumbling on this one part. I sang it back to her in perfect Italian. I might have been 3 years old. She looked at me, stunned, and at that moment, I knew she saw me. I was more than a little girl to her. I was a musician. So how did Mariah attain such musical mastery? As you can see, Mariah was bathed in music. She heard her mother singing all the time, actually, when she was growing up. So music simply just seeped in. Music was her first language. So the first key to musical mastery is Bathe your child in music. Dr. Suzuki says children grow by absorbing and digesting what is available in their environment. Mariah Carey had plenty of music in her environment, a lot of vocal exercises. Her mom actually recorded an album when Mariah was young. And so all of that practicing, all of that singing, she's just absorbing it. And then also she found a connection to her mom through music. I'm going to give you 2 more examples of musicians who were bathed in music. The first is Yo-Yo Ma. His sister played the violin and piano. His father was a music professor, and his mother was a singer. So he's growing up completely immersed in music. Now, what's interesting is how he ended up playing the cello, because his first instrument was the violin. So why did he end up choosing the cello? And how did he come to decide that this was the instrument for him? I'm going to share with you an excerpt from the audiobook Beginner's Mind, written by Yo-Yo Ma. My first exposure to music was probably hearing my sister play the violin, which doubtless instilled in me what would become a deep love of the violin repertoire. My own attempts to play the violin were, shall we say, a disaster. I either grew up frustrated or had no aptitude, and I soon gave up. Now, my memory and my sister's diverge a bit on the details of what happened next. I remember it was during a visit to the Paris Conservatory with my parents. My sister tells me that it was at the movie house in Montparnasse, where a New Orleans-style jazz band was playing. We both agreed, though, that when I first caught sight of a double bass, I was mesmerized and clamored to play one. My sister remembers me saying, "That one, the big one, that is what I want to play." I'm sure it was superficial attraction to size rather than the instrument's sound. So maybe that's why I acquiesced to try the biggest instrument I could handle, a 16th sized cello. I was 4. Unlike Mariah Carey and Yo-Yo Ma, Lin-Manuel Miranda did not have musician parents. And yet he was able to also achieve an incredible amount of musical mastery. He's written Tony-winning musicals. Hamilton also won a Pulitzer Prize. So how did he grow up to write such incredible works of art when his own parents were not even musicians? In fact, his mom said that she is such a bad singer that when she sings with good singers, they ask her to stop singing because she will throw them off key. And yet, even when she had what she knew was not a good singing voice, she would sing to Lin-Manuel to sleep at night. And, she did that every night. So I thought that was wonderful. And apparently it was so soothing to Lin-Manuel that when he went off to college, he had trouble falling asleep, and he called up his mom and said, "Mom, can you please record your singing for me so that I can use it to fall asleep?" So I thought that was a wonderful and sweet gesture that she did for him for so many years. So how does a boy from New York, who's raised by non-musicians, grow up to create such musical masterpieces? Well, the answer is in a 2016 interview where Katie Couric asks Lin-Manuel about his upbringing. And I'm going to quote from this interview. Katie Couric says, "Your mom's a clinical psychologist, your dad's a political consultant, and yet they loved music. And you grew up just surrounded by music. They often played the cast albums for you because they couldn't necessarily afford to take you and your sister to Broadway shows, right?" Lin-Manuel Miranda answers, "Yeah, we saw the 3 Broadway shows you saw, if you saw any in the 80s, which were Cats, Phantom, and Les Mis. That was the Holy Trinity in the 80s. They left a huge imprint on me." So Lin-Manuel grew up saturated in musicals. So now you can see why he ended up writing musicals. That was his mother tongue. His parents were obsessed with musicals and played those cast albums all the time. To watch the video, which I think is so important and so fascinating, I've put that link in the handout. So check that out. How can you bathe your child in music? So please write in the chat, what are some ways to saturate the environment so that your child gets excited about music? I know a lot of you are already doing this. When I work with parents, it's incredible what parents are already doing. A lot of them are already playing a lot of music. They're putting on the CD or the record or the, clicking on where you have to play it on your phone. But there's other ways to bathe children in music. One of my participants in my parent class last year says that what she does is they listen for music in the environment. And recently they had listened to the electric toothbrush. And so what they would do is they would try to sing and match the tone to the toothbrush. And then sometimes they would also harmonize. So it sounds like some of you, Gondar says that you are based in Chicago and you play the classical music channel wherever you're going. Fantastic. Brenna says singing to my favorite playlist while making dinner. That is fantastic. I mean, that's what Lin-Manuel's parents were doing. They had music they loved, and so they played it. And so modeling that behavior is so important. Let's see, Cherry says, don't wait to practice after the child is in bed or at preschool. Practice when the child is right there in the room. Fantastic. Great ideas. So feel free to keep putting in the chat other ideas or things that you are thinking of doing. It doesn't have to be something you are. So this is a nice community setting too, to share ideas. And I'm actually going to put in the chat, I have a little newsletter that I do online, but it also, when you sign up, you get the top 15 ways to inspire kids to make music. So feel free to click on that. And Kitty says, singing the songs in my thoughts, adding words about the present moment for the kids. That is amazing. I love that. Thank you, Katie. So that's the first key to musical longevity. Bathe your child in music. So now I would like to turn to research by Benjamin Bloom. I think Dr. Suzuki would be really happy with his research because you can see the title, it's developing talent in young people. This idea that talent is developed. So what Benjamin Bloom did was that he looked at the lives of 120 people that were experts in their fields. As you can see, it's a variety of experts. And he wanted to understand what was happening in their childhoods that could have contributed to their eventual expertise. What he did well was that he interviewed parents along with the experts. And I've done one interview so far where I was able to interview Caitlin McGaugh. She actually she just won a Grammy. And I interviewed her and her mom. And what was really neat is that, her mom would say things and Caitlin would say, oh, I didn't realize that was happening when I was young. And so it's really nice getting the parents' perspective because they can give insights into what was happening and what they were doing when the kids were young. And the parents, generally, parents of, concert pianists, tennis players, swimmers, sculptors, mathematicians, they generally looked for teachers who were the first teacher to be a kind person, somebody who related well with the child, and also somebody who had good expertise. But what was interesting about that is that if the parents did not approve of the teacher's techniques or personality, another teacher was found very quickly. And this is so important that there is a good fit between the parent and the child. Because when there isn't a good fit, certain things can go wrong. Long had a fantastic first teacher. She was kind and nurturing, and she gave him a strong technical background in music. When he went to his second teacher, he was able to further develop those skills. And the nice thing about his first teacher is that she said, I know you want to make it big, but you can't do that in our small town. You have to go to Beijing and study at the conservatory. So his dad quits his job. He and Long move to Beijing while his mom stays at home because she's got to work. She has to make money to support now 2 households because his dad isn't going to get a job in Beijing. His dad's job becomes to practice with Long every day. And so when they're in Beijing, they move into this hovel. It's a tiny place with rodents. There's no heating, no air conditioning, and they have to share a bathroom with many other families. So they make this sacrifice and they find one of the top piano teachers in Beijing. And so Lala began studying with this teacher, but things go badly. Long Long ends up calling this teacher Professor Angry. Here's a quote from an interview where Long Long talks about Professor Angry. Unfortunately, Professor Angry, I wouldn't say she's a bad person, but once she starts teaching, she makes you really scared. And I started to be afraid of playing the piano instead of bringing the best of emotions toward music. I started to hate the piece I'm performing. So for 6 months, I lost interest in music. I lost my direction in music. Basically, I lost myself. The second key to musical longevity is to find the right teacher. So what does that mean, the right music teacher? Well, the right teacher has two qualities. And if, by the way, if you can guess who's in this photo, any of them, feel free to put that in the chat. The right teacher will have a skilled teaching approach. So they can help your child go from where they are now to either the next level or to musical mastery. So they have the techniques, the expertise. And it's very different, by the way, from a teacher who's just a skilled musician, because you can be a skilled musician without being a skilled teacher. And one of the best things about the Suzuki Association is the incredible amount of pedagogy training. So finding a skilled teacher is important. And then it's also important that the teacher connects with the child. And what's interesting about Benjamin Bloom's study, and I see in the chat that somebody said, Diana said, it changed your life. I love that. It's is that the first teachers of these experts really predominantly, they connected with the child. They were child friendly. They made the initial part of learning fun. There were a lot of games. It was playful, very positive. Rarely was there any criticism. And of course, there was skilled teaching, but that wasn't prominent. A lot of times it was like, who was, the piano, the concert pianist had, whoever was the local teacher. So that was the first teacher. And then subsequently, then the second and, subsequent teachers tended to have very strong teaching approach. And the connection with the child actually was not always as strong. Sometimes they were a little bit more harsh or strict. But the idea was the first teacher helped develop a love of music and instilled this excitement for music. And then the second and subsequent teachers just took that and then really honed in on the skills of playing the instrument. Yes, this is Julie Andrews. Nice, Katie. And this is her voice teacher, Lillian Stiles Allen. Her teacher was phenomenal. She had both of these qualities really strongly. There were times when, because Julie Andrews had also a really tough upbringing. There were times when her teacher would be protective of her, and then also would basically invite her back over and over again. Even after Julie Andrews began performing professionally, she would still go back to her teacher for lessons. So I think that's fantastic. I'm going to share with you two more musicians who had fantastic teachers. Yo-Yo Ma said, the reason I loved my first cello teacher was that she was so nice. I could never do anything wrong. I think she made me love the cello. Yo-Yo Ma goes on to say, quote, a nurturing first teacher who instills a love of music in the child. That describes my first teacher perfectly. Madame Michel Lapin was generous, warm, and gentle. She's now in her 80s, but she still travels to Paris from her home in Normandy whenever I perform there. And every time I see her, I remember the brightness she brought into my 5-year-old world. To hear more from this audio book, I've put the information in the handout. He had a fantastic first teacher. And so did Lin-Manuel Miranda. So his story is a little different from a lot of classical musicians in that he, was listening, if you think about it, he's listening to a lot of musicals at home. And then as a kindergartner, he starts school at Hunter Elementary. And that's the same year Barbara Ames begins teaching music there. And Barbara Ames is, basically decides we're going to start putting on musicals for the sixth graders are going to do a musical, and then the rest of the school will watch. And he said, by the second grade, I was thinking, oh my gosh, what am I going to put on when I'm a sixth grader? And if you think about it, it's probably very unlikely that other kids were as excited as he was. Perhaps if these other kids had, musical obsessed parents. But in his case, he's hearing all this music at home. That's laying a strong foundation. He is seeing musicals being performed at school by his peers. And so he says, my life was really changed by an elementary school teacher named Barbara Ames. And by the time he's a sixth grader, he gets to perform. And not only that, he was able to write a musical to be performed along with it. And it was actually a very long musical. They did a best of kind of thing because Barbara Ames said, by the time he was there, they ran out of kid appropriate musicals. And so they put all this stuff together. It was a 4-hour long production. And then she played the piano for the entire production. And he said, oh, poor Miss Ames. She must have been so tired. But after that, he said, this is, I just thought, if I'm doing this for the rest of my life, if they will let me. He had so much fun being a part of that musical, and that was it. That was it for him. We all know Mozart and his very musical upbringing. He was saturated in music growing up. But what's interesting is that a lot of times people talk about Mozart in terms of him as a prodigy. And prodigies, I think they're kind of fun to think about. But what's interesting about prodigies also is that they also tend to just put in a lot of practice time. In fact, I just read a study that compared prodigies with people who are also making music during those same years of life. And prodigies are putting in at least twice the number of hours, if not more, sometimes 5 times as many hours. And this is another book that I also love, Anders Ericsson. He looks into the lives of experts, and he talks about the importance of deliberate practice, that it's not just hours, but it's how you use those hours. And he also was interested in prodigies to some extent. He says, I've made it a hobby to investigate the stories of such prodigies. He's talking about Mozart. And I can report with confidence that I have never found a convincing case for anyone developing extraordinary abilities without intense, extended practice. So practice matters. And it's so important that when our kids are practicing, that we support music practice. We support what's happening when they're at their instrument. And this is because, just like music practice, we want our kids eventually to be independent and practice by themselves. But in the beginning, we need to help them. It's just like the training wheels on a bike. So the purpose of the bike, it's to ride free without training wheels. But until that happens, the training wheels are there to help support and guide. And that is because music practice includes more than just what happens at the instrument. It also includes these skills like remembering to practice, then beginning the practice. I know sometimes kids get to the instrument and they're just kind of wandering around. So beginning the practice can be hard for some kids. Knowing what to practice and practicing as the teacher has instructed, that's not easy. And then, of course, then the actual instrument skills that will help develop certain technique, and a certain tone. I have to thank Christine Goodner for these ideas. This is in her latest book, and if you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And so she talks about how important it is that we think about kids and essentially they're developing executive functioning skills. So all of these are skills that they don't have yet. It takes them until they're in their 20s. I've heard actually females in their early 20s and males in their late 20s. So if you think about music practice and all of the parts that are involved, I mean, just remembering to practice is really hard for most kids, even teenagers sometimes. You have to not just remember to practice, and that involves memory, but then planning. Well, how do I figure out when to practice and fit it in so that I have adequate time? And it's during a time when I'm not too tired or distracted. So we need to help our children. We need to be their executive functioning brains. That's the frontal lobe. And another way to think about how we can support music practice is to think about launching a rocket into space. So if we want to launch a rocket into space, we want to take away as much friction as possible, and then we want to add massive power. So what are frictions? Things that are considered friction. Type in the chat if you can think of anything that will make it hard for your child to practice. I can think right away. Something that we all have, which is our phones. If if a phone is present, a lot of times that can be like, oh, I'm going to use the phone. But not just for our child, but for us. If we have our phones on us and it's something that's going to either buzz or something, even though we're the ones helping our child, just that little buzz can take our attention away. It looks like, let's see, Alexander says, toys, Pokemon cards, neighborhood kids playing. Yes. Oh, Meikwan, since being bullied at school, I'm so sorry. Hope that never happens. Being overscheduled. Yes, that's another thing that happens that makes it hard. And TV, yep, lack of sleep, too much homework. You guys are coming up with fantastic ideas. Not on the schedule. Yeah, sometimes it's not on the schedule. And then conflicting interests like tennis practice. I think that Joshua Bell also was a pretty good tennis player. So he was doing tennis, and then he often wanted to play video games. And then adding massive power. How do you add massive power? Feel free to type in the chat ways that you can add massive power. We just talked about helping your child develop executive, the kind of being their executive functioning brains and helping them remember, putting them on a schedule. He says, praise, incentives, encouragement. You're spot on, because one of my things is incentives I'm going to talk about. And the other thing is making music with others. Let's see. Brenda says, as a piano teacher, I find I really spend the first year of lessons helping parents get into a regular practice habit. Yes, the practice habit, if you can get that established, then that's the foundation. That's going to help everything outside of that. So we will go on here. So let's talk about incentives. Dr. Suzuki says it is essential to understand children's psychology and to be prepared to foster them with pleasant games. And so there's a lot of different things. There are games. There's games where you can count the number of repetitions. I would dress up with my kids. We would find ways to laugh. There's a lot of ways to do games. Long Long says, my mother helped me by cutting out gold color stars. When I memorized a piece or played something particularly well, she'd give me a star. When I received 5 stars, she bought me a new toy. And then I usually did more privileges. First, my kids had to practice, then they got to choose what they did. And Yo-Yo Ma's dad was fantastic. He said, I'm going to teach you a new trick every day. So the narrative, how you talk about music practice, that's very important. When it comes to making music with others, Dr. Suzuki says, for a little child, it is a joy to do something with everybody else, right? Kids love to do things with everybody else. And we must devise ways to help children study enjoyably in the company of their friends. So let me give you a few examples. Long was growing up in the army barracks. His dad was an army musician. And so you can imagine there was music everywhere. But what was most prominent were these parties his parents would put on. He said every Saturday night, Mom and Dad would invite our musician friends and their kids to our room for a party. And these would be music parties. We were a makeshift family of artists, even us little ones eating, singing, laughing, and playing our hearts out. So they would play together and sing together, and then they would also perform for one another, have little, impromptu concerts. He says, those impromptu concerts remain among the happiest memories of my childhood. Another musician who benefited greatly from making music with others is Lin-Manuel Miranda. He said that hearing the musicals at home, quote, left a huge imprint on me. But then I really fell in love with musicals by doing them in school. I'm quoting him from his interview with Katie Couric. He said, I was lucky enough to get into Hunter. I got to be Bernardo, Captain Hook, a cowhand in Oklahoma, a son in Fiddler, and Ada Pearl backup in The Wiz, and Conrad Birdie in Bye Bye Birdie, which was really the killer because suddenly I'm 12 years old, 3 feet tall, and every girl in my grade has to pretend to be in love with me and faint at my feet when I sing in my gold lame jacket that my grandmother made me. And I go, I'm doing this, whatever this is. I'm doing this for the rest of my life. I highly recommend watching the rest of this video. The link is in the handout. So Lin-Manuel really got excited about musicals by doing them with friends. And that's the important message here, is to make sure that if you can get your child to make music with their friends, that really just seals the deal. And then we have Mariah Carey, who also got very excited about music by making music with others. She didn't just make music with her mom. Luckily, her mom had a lot of musician friends, and so Mariah met a lot of musicians and made music with them throughout her childhood. I'm going to read another excerpt from her book in which Mariah first talks about how often her mother was practicing music, but then also what she loved about living with her mom and what part of music she really enjoyed. Her practicing was a constant, but what I treasured most were the jam sessions. Accomplished musicians would come by and hang out and play music at my mother's bohemian spot by the bay, and I would jam with them. Live music was the best thing about living with my mother. I was surrounded by the love of music, but even more importantly, by the love of musicianship, the love of the craft, the love of the process. I think it's wonderful that Mariah Carey learned to love the process of making music, of creating music through all of these interactions with these incredible musicians. So many people get excited about listening to music and playing music, but Mariah really developed a love for making music, which is why she became such a wonderful songwriter. And so if you remember the musical child pyramid, each part that we've just talked about corresponds to these 3 sections. Bathing your child in music, creating a strong and rich musical environment makes it possible so that when you find the right music teacher, it really sticks. It's really exciting for your child. And then on top of that, supporting music practice so that then your child can gain those skills and do that efficiently. Now, all of these you can't just do once and then be done. It's something you have to continually do as your child grows up. And one of the funnest things I like to say about children is that as they grow, they change. And so what works now sometimes just doesn't work next year, next month, or even sometimes next week. So that's why the fourth key to musical longevity is that we have to be lifelong learners. We have to do things like what you're doing today, which is fantastic. You're attending today's talk. Read articles and books, watch videos, take classes. And as I mentioned before, I'm trying to fill in this gap for parents. And so I've created a parent course where I can take parents step by step into how to raise musical children. So there's so many more things. I wish we had 10 hours. But if you want to look more deeply into this, then feel free to check this out. And this is also a class that can be taken over and over again. A lot of Suzuki courses, I know I have friends who take them over again, and then you get something different. And of course, as your child grows and changes, you're going to need different ideas and different techniques. So I'm hoping that this will help provide that resource for parents. So I'm going to do a quick little quiz for you, and then we will have time for questions. So please type in the chat. First key to musical longevity is to bathe your child in, anybody? Should you get it? Yes. Nice work, Bo. Music. Second key, find the right. Who are going to find the right? That's right. Music teacher. Nice work, everyone. And then 3, what must you do with music practice? How do you make sure music practice is going well? There's the one word, and you've got to support. That's right. Oh, and I've just learned it in, I think, Spanish. Nice. And then 4th, be a what learner? What kind of learner do you want to be? Yes. Lifelong learner. Great. And so then what will you do? We've come to the end of the talk, and I want you to think about something that you feel like, hey, I can try this. I'm going to do this so that I can help my child attain, a deeper love for music. What's something that you feel like grabbed you today that can be helpful? So it says music playing party. Yes, just like Long's, his parents. It was really makeshift, they just kind of come together and make music. So share these ideas with my parents in the studio. Fantastic. Take classes, music parties, go to music halls. Yes, live music is fantastic. Oh, yay, you're going to stop listening to news and then put on the Broadway that you love. Leaning into what students' interests are, fantastic. Yeah, a lot of times, like I have a student who was into the Linda Lindas. And so I said, fantastic, let's use that music and learn about chord structure. So that is fantastic. Keep it going. I'm just going to share with you that I actually do have, I realize that a lot of this information is, there's so much in there. And so if you go to my website, just barbiewong.com/events, there's a handout. You can click on it and download it. And if you want to find me on social media, feel free to do that. And of course, I'm also reachable by email. I'm just so grateful for today's session. And, I just want you to know that what you do, even the smallest bit, matters and it helps. And it's okay if you just start with listening to your favorite music, which I think is one of the best things you can do. And from there, the world is just going to turn into this magical place. And of course, reach out if you have any other questions. Thank you so much for coming today. And I'm very excited to take on some questions.
Thank you so much, Barbie. We really, really appreciate. I hope you're seeing all of the applause that's coming in here through the chat.
Yeah,
So
it's
thank
so
you so
nice.
much. So we don't have a ton of time for questions, but we do have one that maybe we can get to, Barbie. And here's the description. So I'll just read it out to you if that's okay. And for those who don't know me, my name is Angelica Cortez. I'm the executive director of Suzuki Association. So grateful to Barbie, and huge thank you to our translators too for all the work that they're doing. The question is, I have a 6-year-old. He loves practicing and can be at his piano for a very long time, but he is very stubborn and wants to practice only what he wants to and not what he needs or to do homework. So what can I do to make him a bit more interested in practicing new pieces or his homework?
Wow. All right. That's a good question. Well, I would say the first thing is to work with the teacher. I mean, the teachers have a really nice insight or a way to talk to students, where sometimes the students will listen more to the teacher than the parent. I know, because I have 2 kids and so many times they don't listen to me. And that's also why we have that Suzuki triangle, so that you have both of those. So there are times, my 15-year-old is taking lessons with the teacher. I will actually text the teacher and say, we're struggling with this. And then the teacher will say, okay, well, I will mention that in class. And so it's a great way to kind of have both on the same page and to help make that happen. And maybe just looking at one small step, at first. So maybe there's one piece that you want to say, oh, I'd like my child to really practice in this way in this one piece. And then maybe for that practice session, that's what's targeted, so that in the lesson it's talked about, oh, make sure that you do such and such with this piece. And then at home you can say, oh, what did the teacher say about that? Oh, that's right. This one piece, we're supposed to do such and such. And then from there, then you can add on little pieces and then that can grow.
That's beautiful. Yeah. So just like really building a team around the young person that you're working with. And I'm also called to remember what you said about leaning into their interests, right? It's a beautiful thing that, your student loves playing particular things. So let's celebrate that win too, right? Thanks, Barbie. How about any tips for being a music teacher and trying to practice with your own children?
Oh, okay. Am I getting it right that they mean you're being the music teacher for your child and practicing?
Yeah,
okay.
Exactly. So that in that case, we have what I see as a Suzuki line.
Yes. I've done the Suzuki line actually. So
Yeah.
I did the Suzuki line with Tenzin and it failed. And then we got the triangle. But then my second kid, we did the Suzuki line for 11 years and it actually worked. And the reason it worked is because I basically would put on my teacher hat once a week. We did the lesson. I said, these are the things to work on. And then I took the hat off. And for the rest of the week, I could not say anything negative. And it was the hardest thing I ever did in my life. But because I said nothing negative and only spouted out positive things, even though as a teacher, my ears were like burning, it worked. So we were able to have that relationship for 11 years. And so that's what I recommend. Just don't say anything negative, only point out the positive during the practice sessions.
That's great. And this person did clarify actually that that the student does have a teacher, but they themselves are also a music teacher and practicing with their own children. I still feel like what you said is pretty applicable.
I think it is really applicable. And in fact, it's sometimes even more important if you're a music teacher and a parent, because your kid knows that you can hear everything. And so it's going to be even harder. They're going to feel even more sensitive. So really focusing on what's going well is important.
That's great. We have one more question that I'll ask, and then we'll go ahead and close up here. But what tips do you have for parents who are uninitiated in music to support structured practice? I mean, this is someone who's less familiar with music. My son doesn't appreciate the type of music that we listen to normally.
Huh. Well, I'm curious about how old the son is, because when they're really young, the more you play it, they are going to start to like that kind of music. Of course, if your son's like a teenager, then I think by then they'll have different tastes. And in terms of creating structure, again, I think it depends on the age of the child, but when they're young, you just figure that out. Like, when is the optimal time to practice? And you say, hey, okay, it's time to practice. Never use the words, do you want to practice? I learned that the hard way, because most kids will say, no, I don't want to practice. You just say, okay, it's time to practice. Or, hey, would you like to finish up this thing for the next 5 minutes and then come to practice? Or are you ready now?
Yeah. And I think this person wanted to clarify too, 14 years of age. So,
oh, 14. Yeah, that's
a little bit older. It's tougher. Yeah, that group's a little tougher, huh?
It is tough, but there are ways. I have 2 teenagers now, 17 and 15. And actually what we do is we make a family playlist when we go on trips. And so everybody gets to drop in, 3 or 4 songs. And so that's a way for us to listen to each other's music collectively. And it's almost like we all have our own voice in there. And it's a fun way to say, wow, I wonder what this next mix will be like.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and again, I think leaning into what is your students' curiosity, right? What are they interested in? What calls to them? I think that's such a clear through line in what we heard from all the artists that you were sharing, is there was someone who was encouraging their curiosity and really giving them space for that. So
yeah, exactly.
Great. Okay. Well, with that, I think we'll go ahead and close today's session. If everyone can please just join me in giving Barbie as loud of a applause as you possibly can from home. Thank you all so much. And thank you, Barbie. Huge thank you to Luis and Andrea. Thank you both so much for being willing to translate, and clearly huge gratitude to our partners here at Alfred Music. So I'll pass it on off.
Thank you, Angelica. And thank you, Barbie, so much and thank you all of you for joining us today. I've put a link in the chat to some resources, including a post-event survey, so we can continue to improve our webinars in the future. And the resources link also has the link to the first 2 videos of our Suzuki in Action series, as well as the Alfred blog, Suzuki Association of America's website, and barbiewong.com as well. So thank you again for joining us. Have a great weekend, and thank you.